This month, we're asking for your support through our premium programs via the Escapist Plus and YouTube memberships. Your support allows us to continue making the content we want instead of chasing algorithms or the latest trends. Plus, you get a bunch of perks like ad-free viewing via the Escapist Plus on our main website, early access on YouTube via YouTube memberships, and bonus content like our monthly Ask the Creators video series where we answer your burning questions. Thanks in advance for your continued support. It genuinely means the world to us. The week before last, it was reported that the Snyder Cut will include new footage with actors like Ray Fisher, Ben Affleck, Henry Cavill, and Gal Gadot. This material will involve about a week of shooting with the actors in question. This isn't too much of a surprise, although there are very heated debates about to what extent the Snyder Cut was or wasn't finished when Warner Bros. Signed off on it for HBO Max. There was always a need for extra material to justify the extension from Snyder's 3-hour and 34-minute cinematic version to 4, likely extended, hour-long episodes that would be released on HBO Max as a miniseries. The only question was whether this could be accomplished in post-production, or if new material will be needed to pad out what was already available. While the reported $70 million budget might sound like a lot to casual observers, it's not an unreasonable price for a project on this scale. As early as May, Warner Media chairman Bob Greenblatt predicted that the complicated and wildly expensive process would cost far more than early projections of $20 to $30 million. It's still a bargain by contemporary Hollywood standards, where a movie like Ant-Man costs $169.3 million, even allowing for generous Georgia tax breaks. The Snyder Cut offers 4 hours of blockbuster spectacle for roughly the price of Joker. Quick sidebar here for all the movie number nerds in the audience. Quick note to all 5 of you, I want you to know, I see you. Now, the art of Hollywood accounting is a notoriously dark art.
Fugazi, Fugazi, it's a wazi, it's a woozy, it's a fairy dust.
Notably, Forrest Gump, the second highest grossing movie of 1994 at the domestic box office, technically did not turn a profit. A fact that I am absolutely certain has nothing to do with the fact that had the movie in fact turned a profit, the studio would have had to pay out to the author Winston Groom. However, the threshold budget for a viable streaming release seems to be between $70 million and $100 million. Trolls World Tour reportedly earned almost $100 million on streaming. The estimated streaming earnings on Mulan run from about $33.5 million to $93 million. Disney were reportedly happy with the streaming returns on the $75 million they spent on Hamilton. Apple were reportedly happy on the return on the $70 million investment they spent buying Greyhound from Sony. This suggests that streaming can be a viable market for a certain range of studio spending, but for movies with smaller budgets than the modern $200 million tentpole. So $70 million spent on a re-release of Justice League may actually seem like a practical investment. End sidebar. Of course, critics might argue that the additional $70 million should be added to the reported $300 million budget for the theatrical release of Justice League. However, this ignores the reality that, at this point, the theatrical cut of Justice League exists in the studio archives as raw material. It has already been paid for, and has already been exploited as a commercial entity of itself. If that raw material could be reshaped and remolded to produce something else that is commercially viable on its own terms, then why shouldn't it be? More to the point, the Snyder Cut seems to gesture to the immediate future of Hollywood. The global pandemic continues to rage. There is a question about how long it will take to return to normal afterwards, and it seems likely that the process will be a gradual return rather than a sudden switch. There's some suggestion that a vaccination program may not be viable until 2024. Even then, it seems likely that the political, social, and economic impact of the pandemic will be felt for decades. Hollywood is adapting in its own ways. At the moment, the most visible challenges to the industry are on the distribution side, with studios constantly reshuffling their release calendars as the pandemic makes traditional theatrical release models unviable, and streaming has been unable to make up the shortfall. However, it also affects the production of new film and television, which will become an issue as the already produced content is gradually released. Some production has resumed in the recent weeks and months, notably on blockbusters shooting internationally, like the as-yet untitled 7th Mission Impossible film, or Jurassic World Dominion. However, these productions have been beset by problems. The Batman had to shut down production just days after shooting resumed when star Robert Pattinson was diagnosed with coronavirus. Insert your own joke here about how he was wearing the wrong kind of mask. Meanwhile, Dominion had to alter its shooting plans around an outbreak in Malta. However, Hollywood cannot simply halt film and television production during the crisis. as that would mean potentially losing ground to industries and countries that are handling the pandemic better. The highest grossing movie of 2020 to date is the Chinese epic The 800. Film production is already roaring back to life in China, with 48 film crews filming in early September and 63 more reportedly in prep. Hollywood cannot afford to keep waiting to produce new content. The pandemic causes a variety of problems for an industry as globalized as Hollywood. Even outside of the risks of placing many people working long hours in a tightly confined space like a film set, there are logistical issues to consider. To pick one small example, actor Liv Tyler has dropped out of the show 911 Lone Star because she no longer considers it safe to commute to the United States from her home in Britain. Quick sidebar here, because this is probably the only time I'm going to get to talk about 911 Lone Star, a show in which Liv Tyler plays a paramedic obsessed with finding out what happened to her dead sister. This process involves consulting with witch doctors and performing what can only be described as seances in her bathtub. Truly, the show will be a lesser place without her. Still, Rob Lowe will presumably return to his role playing a 9/11 first responder who has also been diagnosed with lung cancer and who is haunted by recurring nightmares where people would rather burn to death in a fire than be rescued by a man rendered bald by his cancer treatments. I guess what I'm saying is, 911 Lone Star is pretty wild, y'all. Yeehaw! End sidebar. As a result, the film industry is embracing approaches that do not involve the financial or personal risk of traditional production. As animators can often work from the comfort of their homes or in socially distant spaces, animation has thrived during the pandemic, becoming a stopgap for live-action shows like The Blacklist or One Day at a Time. However, while Trolls World Tour seems to be the one unqualified streaming success story of the pandemic, with the possible exception of Hamilton, animation is not a model that will work in all cases. Instead, the Snyder Cut suggests an alternative model for studios looking to produce and release new content during the current crisis. After all, even allowing for the week of filming, the bulk of the work on the Snyder Cut is in post-production. As such, this work could be done safely, even during a global pandemic. It is effectively a new blockbuster movie at a fraction of the regular cost, and without the risk of filming. It is no surprise that the weeks following the announcement of the Snyder Cut saw similar announcements that key creative figures would be re-editing and restructuring existing films to create new versions. Director Francis Ford Coppola is reportedly working on recutting The Godfather Part 3, rebranding it as, deep breath here, Mario Puzo's The Godfather, Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone, a title that may be almost as long as the film itself, to be released in December.
Godfather 3, good version.
Sylvester Stallone is planning a reportedly robot-less re-edit of Rocky IV. After all, many of the handful of profitable theatrical releases during the pandemic have been re-releases. The 40th anniversary re-release of The Empire Strikes Back topped the United States box office for a few weeks during the summer, while the re-release of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone at the Chinese box office pushed the film's cumulative worldwide gross past $1 billion. The Chinese re-release of Interstellar performed similarly well. Artistically, this might be the logical endpoint of a blockbuster industry built on the constant recycling of familiar intellectual property as mass media entertainment. Many modern movies are just reiterations of familiar formulae, with recognizable brands layered on top. A cynical observer might argue that Joker is just Taxi Driver and the King of Comedy with a customizable Batman skin. Even within franchise, there's a constant recycling of imagery and invocation of memory. The Force Awakens faithfully emulates the original Star Wars, while Star Trek movies have been trying to recreate the Wrath of Khan dating back to First Contact, then through Nemesis, and most obviously in the J.J. Abrams duology. And there were 3 different Spider-Man franchises within a decade of one another. Even in the Terminator franchise, characters are trapped in stasis so they can repeat old patterns and character arcs, while the franchise itself is reduced to empty imagery continuously restaged and replayed. Recycling the films themselves, restructuring the footage, editing the sound, rather than simply reusing the old iconography, may be the next logical step in this pattern. In that sense, perhaps there's something of value in these revisitations of old material. After all, even leaving aside the tastelessness of how Snyder was reportedly removed from the project, and allegations of abuse on the set by his replacement Joss Whedon, the theatrical cut of Justice League was a particularly empty exercise in franchise branding. At least the version released on HBO Max will be the distinctive and personal work of a director with a unique, if frankly polarizing, perspective. For his part, Francis Ford Coppola may no longer be the potent and vital creative force that he was when he produced classics like The Conversation, The Godfather Part 2, and Apocalypse Now, but there's little to lose in giving him the chance to bring his desired version of The Godfather Part 3 to the screen. Similarly, There's nothing lost in having an alternate version of Rocky IV available for comparison and discussion, particularly if Stallone wants to do something interesting with it. In an era where new content is harder to produce than ever, there might yet be value found in giving creative individuals the freedom and space to reshape and remold their earlier work however they want. I've been Darren Mooney, and this is In the Frame.